It was one of those lazy Sunday afternoons where the air feels thick with quiet. The house was mine for a few hours. No TV, no clinking dishes, no Ethan shuffling papers in his office. Just me, the faint hum of the ceiling fan, and the soft scent of lavender from the polish I'd been using all morning. I moved through the living room like I always do, straightening cushions that no one but me notices are crooked, dusting corners that probably didn't need it, but gave me a strange sense of control. My hands eventually drifted to the bookshelf, our little museum of shared moments, novels bought on vacations, gifts for birthdays, the odd impulse buy from airport shops. I started pulling books down one by one, giving them a quick dust, flipping through a few pages just for the feel of it. My fingers landed on one of Ethan's newer ones, a sleek hardcover he'd picked up a couple of months ago. He'd made such a point of saying he couldn't wait to read it, but I hadn't seen it move from the shelf since. I told myself I'd just check the first few pages, nothing more. But the moment I cracked it open, something slipped out and fluttered to the floor like it was trying to escape. I bent down and picked it up. A small folded piece of paper, neatly creased, almost delicate. It wasn't a receipt or some scrap of notes like I expected. It was heavier somehow, the paper soft and worn at the edges. When I unfolded it, I saw handwriting. Looping, deliberate, and far too personal to be mine. To the man who stole my heart and keeps it beating. Forever yours, M. My hands went still. My pulse didn't. I read it again. And again. Each time, the words seemed to get louder in my head. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the page like it might rearrange itself into something harmless if I gave it time. But no. Those words were etched with certainty, each letter dripping with intimacy I hadn't felt from Ethan in longer than I wanted to admit. My mind snagged on that single initial, M. It was too deliberate, like the sender assumed Ethan would know exactly who it was. My chest felt tight, not from heartbreak, at least not yet, but from the sharp, icy awareness that something in my life had just shifted, and I couldn't unsee it. I closed the book slowly, slipping the note back between the pages as if I were tucking away something dangerous. The irony hit me, a love note hidden in a novel we'd both walked past 100 times. I placed it back on the shelf, my hands steady in a way they shouldn't have been. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I wasn't going to call him and ask. No, not yet. Asking meant tipping my hand. And if there was one thing I learned in my life, it's that you don't go into battle without knowing the terrain. The afternoon light spilled through the curtains, warm and golden, mocking me with its calm. I picked up the dust cloth again, pretending to clean, but my head was somewhere else entirely. The way Ethan's voice had sounded tired lately. The nights he came home smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his. The vague, working late texts. All these moments I had brushed off now lined up neatly in my memory, forming a picture I didn't want to recognize. I didn't know who M was yet, but I knew this wasn't going to stay a mystery for long. I sank onto the couch, the fabric cool against my skin, and let the book sit on the coffee table in front of me. It looked innocent there, like it wasn't holding a grenade between its covers. My eyes kept darting back to it, my brain buzzing with 100 versions of what forever yours could mean. A slip from an old friend? No, that kind of tenderness doesn't belong to friendship. A joke? Impossible. Ethan doesn't do romance as a punchline. My gut told me the truth, even if my mouth wasn't ready to say it yet. I reached for my phone, instinctively tempted to scroll through his messages. But I stopped myself. This wasn't the time for a sloppy search that could leave digital footprints. If I was going to confirm what my heart already suspected, I had to be methodical. I pressed the phone back onto the table and instead walked to the window, pulling the curtain slightly to let more light in, as if brightness could help me think clearer. Somewhere out there, Ethan was going about his day, completely unaware that his little secret had just landed in my lap. My reflection in the glass caught my attention. I didn't look devastated. I looked alert. Sharper somehow. Maybe that was the surprise in all this, the absence of immediate heartbreak. This wasn't a scene from a melodrama where I collapse in tears. This was something quieter, colder, steadier. I wasn't going to scream or cry. I was going to find out exactly what I was dealing with. And when I did, I'd decide how the story would play out, on my terms. The days that followed felt different, like I was living in two versions of my life at once. On the surface, I kept the rhythm going. Work, errands, the casual, "How was your day?" exchanges with Ethan over dinner. But beneath it, there was this quiet hum in my mind, a constant replay of that note and the sharp loop of questions it sparked. I became hyper-aware of every small thing. The way he checked his phone before answering me, how his eyes flicked away when I asked simple questions, the scent of soap that wasn't ours lingering faintly on his shirt. I started combing through my mental archives, stitching together moments I'd dismissed. The emergency meetings that popped up late at night. The quick weekend work trips that didn't quite fit his usual schedule. The way his tone changed when he talked about a certain coworker, Marina. He'd mentioned her a few times, always with that careful casualness that almost dares you to notice. And now, with that letter signed M, the dots began to connect in a way I couldn't ignore. I didn't let my suspicion show. If anything, I played it warmer. Softer smiles, more questions about his day. Even leaning in when he told me the smallest stories. I wasn't doing it out of affection. I was studying him. Watching for patterns, the cracks in his rehearsed lines. It wasn't about catching him in the act anymore. It was about building the full picture, so that when the time came, I'd have every piece exactly where I wanted it. One afternoon, while Ethan was out, I let curiosity guide me through the house like a quiet shadow. I wasn't tearing through drawers or overturning furniture. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I moved with the same deliberate calm I'd used to set a dinner table. In his desk, I found a few crumpled receipts tucked beneath a stack of old bills, dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together, dated on nights he'd claimed to be working late. The amounts weren't extravagant, but the details were intimate. 2 entrees, a shared dessert, a bottle of wine. I checked his laptop next, not to dig deep. I wasn't ready to risk leaving a trail, but to skim the surface. His recent browser history was wiped clean, which was almost worse than finding something incriminating. That kind of precaution doesn't come from habit. It comes from someone who has something to hide. And while I didn't get much from the screen, I did notice the way his email tabs were grouped, one always left open to his work account. It struck me as overly curated, like a stage set for anyone who might peek over his shoulder. Every small clue I found added another brushstroke to the picture I was painting in my mind. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun just yet. That would come. For now, I was collecting the whispers, the almosts, the nearly nothings that, when put together, would speak louder than any single confession. And with each piece I found, my resolve grew sharper. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was preparation. That night, I lay in bed beside Ethan, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. He looked peaceful, almost boyish in his sleep, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if I was imagining it all. But then I pictured that note again, the looping "forever yours," and the thought dissolved like sugar in hot tea. My mind drifted to Marina, the way her name always seemed to slip out of his mouth with a softness he didn't use for others. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to keep me awake longer than I wanted. In the darkness, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't confront him empty-handed. I wouldn't give him the chance to lie his way out of this or twist the story so I looked like the paranoid wife. If he was cheating, I'd have evidence so undeniable that even he wouldn't be able to spin it. My weapon wouldn't be rage. It would be precision. quiet, steady, calculated. By the time the first hint of morning light filtered through the blinds, I had a plan forming. I knew who to call, where to start, and how to move without tipping him off. The game had begun, and I wasn't about to lose. I didn't have to think long about who could help me without asking too many questions. Claire, an old friend from college, worked at a cafe right across the street from Ethan's office. We hadn't spoken in a while, but the moment I called, her warm laugh spilled through the line like no time had passed. I didn't dive into the full story, just said I needed her eyes on something. She didn't hesitate. "Consider it done," she told me, her voice shifting into that no-nonsense tone she used when she meant business. Over the next few days, Claire's updates came in like breadcrumbs. Quick texts about seeing Ethan walking with someone. A blurry photo of the back of a woman's head. Long, dark hair spilling over a beige coat. And then, one afternoon, she sent the image that made my stomach flip. Ethan and Marina, sitting at an outdoor table, their heads tilted close, hands brushing like it was the most natural thing in the world. He was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, and not at me. Seeing it didn't make me cry. It made me certain. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't innocent. The note, the dinners, the late nights, all of it had been pointing here. And now I had proof. Real proof. The kind that couldn't be denied, no matter how skilled a liar tried to spin it. Once the first photo came, more followed. Claire seemed almost protective now, sending me everything without filter. Ethan leaning across the table to brush something from Marina's hair, their fingers laced together as they crossed the street, that lingering kiss by his car before she walked away. Each image was another nail in the coffin of whatever marriage I thought I had. And yet, with every new detail, I felt less like a grieving wife and more like a strategist collecting intel for a final, decisive move. I started a folder, nothing dramatic, just a neatly labeled one on a hidden drive. Inside, I placed the pictures, scans of the receipts, even a photo of the book with the note tucked inside. I made sure everything was dated, clean, and undeniable. If Ethan ever thought he could gaslight his way out of this, he'd be sorely mistaken. I wasn't going to give him a single inch to twist the truth. At night, I'd glance at that folder and feel the weight of it. Not the emotional weight, that had begun to dissolve, but the power it held. This wasn't about catching him anymore. It was about setting the stage so that when the curtain rose, every player in the room would see exactly who he really was. And when that day came, I wanted it to be unforgettable. A week later, Claire called instead of texting. Her voice was low, urgent, like she knew this was the final piece. "You might want to sit down for this," she said before sending the video. I pressed play, and there they were, Ethan and Marina, standing on the sidewalk outside a small bistro, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Then, without hesitation, he cupped her face and kissed her like it was a promise. Not a quick peck. Not a mistake. A kiss that belonged to two people who had been crossing lines for a long time. I watched it twice, maybe 3 times, not to torture myself, but to study it. The ease in his body language, the way she leaned into him. There was no shame, no secrecy in that moment. Just two people sure of the lie they were living. And for the first time, I felt something dangerously close to relief. I didn't have to wonder anymore. The guessing game was over. I saved the video in my folder, labeling it Final Proof. Then I sat back in my chair, the edges of a plan sharpening in my mind. This wasn't going to end with a private confrontation in the kitchen. No. If Ethan wanted to play out his little romance in secret, I would end it in the brightest, most unforgettable spotlight I could find. And as it happened, the perfect opportunity was already on the calendar. Ethan had been talking about the networking event for weeks, dropping little reminders like breadcrumbs, the guest list, the menu, how important it was that our home looked just right. He made it sound like a celebration, a chance to impress his colleagues and his boss. I smiled and nodded through every detail, never letting him see the flicker of anticipation behind my eyes. He thought I was hosting for him. In truth, I was preparing the stage for me. The day of the event, I moved through the house with a calm, deliberate energy. Flowers in the vases, candles in the corners, glasses lined up in perfect rows. Every small touch was part of the show, and I wasn't talking about the networking. I even set the infamous book on a side table in the living room, its cover facing outward, as harmless as a family photo. Only I knew what was hiding between its pages. By the time guests began arriving, the air was warm with polite laughter and the scent of rosemary from the hors d'oeuvres. Ethan played the charming host, shaking hands, making introductions, weaving through the room with that easy confidence I used to admire. I stayed close enough to watch him, far enough that he couldn't read what was in my mind. Because tonight, the truth wasn't going to whisper from a folded piece of paper. Tonight, it was going to roar. It happened naturally, like the room itself leaned in to listen. A lull in conversation, glasses clinking softly, everyone gathered in small clusters. I stepped forward, my hand resting lightly on the book's spine. "If I could have your attention for just a moment," I said, my voice warm enough to keep them from suspecting what was coming. Faces turned toward me, curious, polite, waiting. Ethan, mid-laugh with a colleague, glanced over and smiled like he was proud of whatever gracious hosting he thought I was about to do. "I'd like to share something personal," I began, flipping open to the first page. A love note, the sweetest one I've ever read, in fact. Unfortunately, it wasn't written to me. The room shifted. A few raised brows, an awkward chuckle or two. Ethan's smile froze, just for a second. Then I read it aloud, each word of the dedication rolling off my tongue slow enough for everyone to absorb. "To the man who stole my heart and keeps it beating. Forever yours, M." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. I could feel eyes darting between Ethan and me, whispers beginning to thread through the group. I closed the book with a soft thud, then reached for my folder, pulling out a neatly printed photo. Ethan and Marina, hand in hand. I held it up just long enough for the nearest guests to see before passing it to the next. By the time it reached his boss, the murmur had turned into a ripple of disbelief. Ethan's voice cracked the silence, low at first, then sharper. "Laura, what are you doing?" But I didn't answer him. Not yet. I simply smiled, the kind of smile that says, "I know exactly what I'm doing." I let the photos circulate, let the truth make its slow, deliberate circuit through the room. His colleagues avoided his eyes, some shifting uncomfortably, others watching with a mix of pity and fascination. His boss lingered on the images a beat too long before handing them back, expression unreadable but heavy with judgment. When I finally met Ethan's gaze, his face was pale, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for a script he hadn't rehearsed. "It's not what it looks like," he started, but the line landed flat in the air between us. I tilted my head, almost as if I might humor him, then set the book down on the coffee table, right beside the untouched wine glasses. "You're right," I said evenly. "It's worse." A few gasps broke out, sharp and quiet, like the sound of glass cracking. I didn't raise my voice, didn't throw anything, didn't cry. I just stepped back, letting the weight of the moment crush him from every angle. The photos, the note, the audience. This wasn't a fight in private. This was exposure. And as the room buzzed with uneasy chatter, I turned toward the kitchen, knowing the damage was already done and the story was no longer his to control. The morning after the event, the house felt strangely hollow, like the echoes of last night's murmurs were still clinging to the walls. Ethan had left early, no doubt trying to salvage what was left of his reputation at work. I didn't ask where he was going, and he didn't offer. That suited me just fine. My coffee tasted richer than it had in weeks, the air lighter without the need to pretend. The confrontation wasn't just a release, it was a turning point. By Monday, I was sitting across from my lawyer, sliding the folder across his desk. He leafed through the photos and receipts in silence, his brows lifting slightly when he reached the dedication in the book. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is gold." It wasn't romantic gold, of course. It was leverage. The kind that could turn a messy separation into a clean, favorable split. I left his office with paperwork already in motion, each signature another nail sealing this chapter shut. News travels fast in offices, especially when humiliation is involved. By midweek, I'd heard from a mutual acquaintance that Ethan's affair was the main topic of whispered conversations near the coffee machine. Marina, it seemed, didn't have the stomach for the fallout. She'd ended things, leaving him not just exposed, but alone. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching the dominoes fall from a distance was satisfaction enough. The weeks that followed were quieter, but they carried a strange kind of energy, the kind you feel when you finally put down something heavy you've been carrying for too long. I started reclaiming the house, piece by piece. The bookshelf was the first to change. I pulled his novels down, boxed them up, and filled the empty spaces with titles I'd been meaning to read for years. The book with the note? I didn't burn it, like some dramatic gesture. I kept it. Proof, and a reminder that I would never again ignore the quiet signs. There were small freedoms I didn't expect. Cooking what I wanted without compromise. Playing my music in the mornings without headphones. Stretching across the whole bed without worrying about someone else's restless legs. These weren't grand acts of reinvention, but they felt like tiny rebellions, each one reclaiming a little more of me. And slowly, I realized I didn't miss Ethan. Not his voice, not his presence, not even the version of him I thought I loved. One Saturday, while sorting through a drawer, I found a photo of us from years ago, smiling, sunburned, holding hands on a beach. I looked at it for a long moment before tucking it away in an envelope marked "Past." That's where it belonged now. Not in a frame, not on the wall. Just another chapter I'd closed, filed away, and no longer needed to revisit. A month after the papers were signed, I found myself wandering through a little independent bookstore downtown. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee, the kind of place where time feels slower, softer. I drifted between the aisles, running my fingers along the spines until I found one that pulled me in, a story about resilience, about starting over. It felt fitting. At the counter, the cashier asked if I wanted to leave a dedication inside, and without hesitation, I smiled and said yes. I took the pen and wrote in the neatest script I could manage. To the woman who finally turned the page. My own name beneath it. No initials to hide behind. No secrecy. Just a simple truth that belonged entirely to me. I closed the book and slid it into the paper bag, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Not just freedom, but a quiet pride. Walking out into the cool afternoon air, I realized the story wasn't about Ethan at all anymore. It was about me, about finding the courage to stand in the light after years in someone else's shadow, and as the door shut behind me, I didn't look back. Some books, once you finish them, you know you'll never need to read again.
The boardroom of Meridian Medical Center was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. 12 people sat around the gleaming conference table, but only one was speaking. Your repeated accusations about the Vastar trial have become disruptive and damaging. Dr. William Montgomery, CEO of Meridian and my father-in-law, continued. The board has unanimously voted to terminate your position. I looked around at the faces I'd known for years, colleagues, mentors, friends. Most averted their gaze. Only Dr. Elaine Chen, head of oncology, had the decency to look uncomfortable. Finally, my eyes settled on my husband, Dr. Michael Montgomery, chief of surgery and the rising star of Meridian. He stared at his perfectly manicured hands, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "Michael?" I said quietly. "Anything to add?" He cleared his throat. "Elena, you've been unstable since losing that patient last year. These allegations, they're not based in reality. Dad's offering a generous severance if you agree to counseling. My name is Dr. Elena Rivera Montgomery, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the director of clinical research at one of Philadelphia's most prestigious hospitals. My crime? Discovering that Meridian's flagship drug trial, a cardiovascular treatment called Vasira, was killing patients while the hospital and its pharmaceutical partner falsified data to hide it. I'm unstable." I kept my voice level, professional. "The Vasira trial has a mortality rate nearly triple what's being reported. Patient 47 died from catastrophic liver failure, a known side effect you're deliberately concealing. Patient 23's cardiac event was." Enough. William slammed his hand on the table. "These accusations are not only unfounded but potentially libelous. The Vassar trial has passed every regulatory review." "Because you're hiding the adverse events," I countered, "categorizing deaths as unrelated to treatment when they clearly show the toxicity pattern." "Security will escort you to clear out your office," William interrupted, nodding to his assistant who stood by the door. "Your hospital credentials have already been deactivated." I stood slowly, straightening my white coat, the symbol of the oath I took to do no harm. $97 million, I said quietly. Michael looked up sharply. "What?" "That's how much Medcore Pharmaceuticals has invested in Meridian for this trial. That's what patients' lives are worth to you." "Elena, please." Michael finally stood, reaching for my arm. "Don't do this. Think about our future." I pulled away. "I am." As security escorted me to my office, staff members watched with wide eyes. Meridian was Philadelphia's medical crown jewel, a teaching hospital with cutting-edge research and some of the best physicians in the country. It was also the Montgomery family legacy, built by William's father and destined to be passed to Michael. I had once been proud to be part of this institution, proud to have married into the Montgomery medical dynasty. Now I felt only disgust. My office door had already been relabeled. Inside, boxes waited for my personal belongings. My computer was gone, no doubt being scrubbed of any incriminating research I'd compiled. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this day for months, ever since I first noticed the discrepancies in the Vassar trial data. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, glancing nervously down the hall before slipping inside and closing the door. "They're saying you had a breakdown," she whispered. "That the stress of research and clinical practice was too much." "Of course they are," I replied, gathering family photos from my desk. "It's easier than admitting I'm right." "Are you?" Her voice wavered. "Right, about Basira." I stopped packing and met her gaze. "Elaine, you've seen patient 64's liver panels. You consulted on patient 18's case before he died, you know." She looked away. "William says those were coincidences, unrelated to the treatment. And you believe that? Or are you just afraid to question it?" "What happens to Meridian if this gets out?" she asked. "What happens to all the good we do? What good is that if we're killing patients to fund it?" I countered. Security knocked at the door. "Dr. Rivera, your escort is waiting." As I left the hospital that had been my professional home for 8 years, I felt surprisingly calm. The deception, the corruption, the ethical compromises, they had been suffocating me for months. Being fired was, in a strange way, liberating. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Where are you going?" "We need to talk." I ignored it, driving instead to a small coffee shop across town. Dr. Nate Sharma was already waiting at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee in front of him. "They finally did it?" he asked as I sat down. I nodded. Nate had been my resident when I first joined Meridian. Now he worked for the FDA's Office of Scientific Investigations. "Unanimous vote," I confirmed, taking a sip of coffee, my husband included. Nate winced. "I'm sorry, Elena. That's rough." Not unexpected, I pulled a flash drive from my pocket and slid it across the table. "This is everything. Original lab values, actual adverse event reports, internal emails about reclassifying treatment-related deaths, the statistical manipulation they're using to hide the mortality signal." Nate picked up the drive. "You know they'll claim you fabricated this. That it's the work of a disgruntled ex-employee." That's why I've been making copies and documenting the verification chain for 3 months, I replied. Every piece of data has multiple sources, and I'm not the only one who knows, just the only one willing to speak up. The investigation team arrives tomorrow, Nate said. Once this is official, it's going to get ugly. The Montgomerys have powerful friends, Elena. I know, but their friends can't hide 93 patients armed by Vasera, 14 of them fatally. After leaving Nate, I drove to the small apartment I quietly rented 2 weeks earlier. I'd seen enough whistleblower cases to know what was coming: character assassination, professional isolation, and likely divorce. Michael had chosen his family legacy over medical ethics long ago. He'd just never been tested until now. My phone had 17 missed calls and dozens of texts. Most were from Michael, growing increasingly angry. One was from my mother-in-law, Eleanor. You're making a terrible mistake. William can still fix this if you reconsider. Fix this, as if the problem were my ethics, not their lack of them. I was unpacking my meager belongings when a knock came at the door. Through the peephole, I saw Michael, his hospital tie loosened, his face flushed with either anger or the 3 drinks I knew he'd have had by now. I know you're in there, Elena, he called. Your car is outside. I opened the door but blocked the entrance. How did you find me? Credit card statement, he replied, trying to peer past me into the apartment. What is this place? Are you seriously hiding out in some efficiency apartment when we have a home? We have a house bought with Montgomery money, filled with Montgomery furniture, on Montgomery land, I corrected. I needed somewhere else. This is ridiculous. Dad is furious, but he's willing to overlook this if you get help. Real help, Elena. You're not well. I studied the man I had loved for 9 years, trying to see any trace of the idealistic doctor I'd met during residency. When did you first know about Basera, Michael? When did you realize patients were dying and decide to help cover it up? His expression hardened. You're twisting things. Clinical trials have adverse events. That's why we do the trials, to find the risk-benefit balance. And when the risks include death, we're supposed to report that, not hide it, I countered. 14 people, Michael. Mothers, fathers, grandparents who trusted us. Who trusted us to pioneer treatments that will save thousands more. He exploded. This is bigger than a few adverse events, Elena. Vasera could revolutionize cardiovascular medicine. MedCorp has invested nearly $100 million in Meridian, in research that helps real patients every day. So the ends justify the means? Is that the Montgomery medical oath now? He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair. You've always been so rigid, so black and white. Medicine requires flexibility. Dad understood that when he built Meridian into what it is today. Flexibility, I repeated. Is that what we're calling fraud now? Be careful, Elena, he warned, voice dropping. You're making accusations you can't prove against people who can destroy your career with a phone call. I stepped back. Goodbye, Michael. I'll have my lawyer contact you about divorce proceedings. Divorce? He looked genuinely shocked. Over a professional disagreement? No, over the fact that you chose money and family reputation over patients' lives. That makes us fundamentally incompatible. I closed the door on his protests, leaning against it as tears finally came. Not for the marriage I was losing, that had been dying for longer than I'd admitted, but for how far the idealistic doctors we'd once been had fallen. The next morning, I watched the local news from my apartment as the FDA investigation was announced. Meridian released a statement expressing full confidence in the integrity of our research and concern about the mental health of a former employee making unfounded accusations. By afternoon, the story had reached national news. Michael texted once. You've gone too far. There's no coming back from this. He was right, but not in the way he meant. Dr. Chen called around dinner time. They're in full panic mode, she said quietly. William has lawyers everywhere. They're pulling records, coaching staff on what to say to investigators. But they can't alter the actual patient data, I replied. Not all of it. Elena, she hesitated. I think I need to talk to the FDA too. Patient 71. I treated her seizures last month. They weren't from her pre-existing condition like William claimed. Do you have documentation? Yes, I kept separate notes after our conversation about patient 47. One by one, the dominoes were beginning to fall. Over the next week, I watched from a distance as the investigation expanded. 2 more Meridian doctors contacted the FDA with corroborating evidence. Medcore Pharmaceuticals announced they were cooperating fully while conducting their own internal review. On day 9, the pharmaceutical company's stock plummeted when an internal email leaked, showing executives discussing how to manage the adverse event narrative. Meridian's public relations team worked overtime, but the damage was spreading. Then came the lawsuit. The family of patient 23, Martin Reynolds, a 57-year-old father of 3, filed the first wrongful death claim against both Meridian and Medcore. Their lawyer had somehow obtained Mr. Reynolds' actual lab values, showing clear Vasera toxicity that had been omitted from the official trial records. I recognized the lawyer's name immediately, Jessica Winters, my roommate from medical school who had chosen law over medicine. I wasn't surprised when she called me that evening. "I need you as an expert witness," she said without preamble. "You're the only one who saw the whole picture. I'm also the mentally unstable former employee according to Meridian's PR team," I reminded her. "Which makes you the perfect whistleblower. The more they attack you, the worse they look when the evidence backs you up." I considered this. "How many families have contacted you?" 9 so far, more calling every day as the news spreads. 9 families seeking justice for loved ones whose deaths had been classified as unrelated to treatment by doctors they trusted. My testimony could help them, but it would also permanently end any chance of my returning to mainstream medicine. The Montgomery's influence reached far. "I'll do it," I said finally. "But I want to meet the families first. This isn't just about exposing Meridian. It's about making sure they understand what really happened to their loved ones." 2 weeks after my firing, I received a text from Nate, Montgomery Sr., placed on administrative leave. Medcore CEO resigned. "You should turn on the news." The FDA had announced a full regulatory action. The Vasera trial was suspended. Patients were being contacted for follow-up medical evaluations. Criminal investigations were being considered. Michael called later that night, his voice rough with either exhaustion or tears. "They're saying Dad could face charges. Criminal charges, Elena." "For what? Trying to develop a medication that could save lives?" "For falsifying safety data that cost lives," I corrected gently. "Michael, I never wanted this to hurt you, but you did it anyway," he interrupted bitterly. "My father's legacy, my family's hospital, my marriage, all collateral damage in your crusade." "No," I said firmly. "Consequences of your choices. You knew, Michael. Maybe not everything, but enough. And you chose silence." After we hung up, I sat looking at our wedding photo, the last one I brought from my office. We'd been so young, so certain we would change medicine together. When had he decided that the Montgomery name was worth more than the Montgomery reputation for medical excellence? 3 months after my termination, I testified before a congressional committee investigating pharmaceutical research practices. The hearing room was packed with press, industry representatives, and families of Vasera patients. Michael sat in the back row, watching silently as I detailed the systematic fraud I had uncovered. "Dr. Rivera," one congressman asked, "why do you think so many respected physicians went along with this deception?" I considered my answer carefully. Medicine isn't immune to institutional corruption. When prestigious names, significant funding, and career advancement all depend on certain outcomes, ethical lines blur. The Vasera trial didn't begin as fraud. It began as hope for a breakthrough treatment, but when that hope collided with disappointing results, decisions were made to protect investments rather than patients. And your own career? You must have known exposing this would essentially end it. I thought about the job offers I'd received since becoming the face of the Vasera scandal: medical ethics consultant, patient advocacy organizations, even academic positions focusing on research integrity. "My career didn't end," I replied. "It transformed. As physicians, we pledge to do no harm. Sometimes keeping that pledge requires difficult choices." Later, as I left the hearing room, Michael approached me. He looked older, the Montgomery confidence replaced by something more humble. "The divorce papers are ready for your signature," he said quietly. "Thank you." I studied his face. "How are you doing?" He gave a hollow laugh. "Dad's facing federal charges. The hospital board has removed the Montgomery name from the research wing. Half our staff is looking for other positions." "How do you think I'm doing?" "Building something new from the ruins," I suggested. "Isn't that what good doctors do?" He looked surprised. You still think I'm a good doctor, after everything? I think you were a good doctor who made bad choices, I corrected. The question is what you'll do now. 6 months later, Meridian Medical Center was under new leadership. William Montgomery had agreed to a plea deal, admitting to research fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. Medcore Pharmaceuticals faced billions in fines and civil settlements. I was leaving my office at the National Center for Research Integrity, a newly created organization where I now served as medical director, when my assistant mentioned a visitor waiting in the lobby. Dr. Elaine Chen sat nervously, twisting her wedding ring. She stood when she saw me. Elena, thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would. Of course, I gestured to the chairs. How are things at Meridian? Different, she said. Better, I think. The new administration has implemented triple verification protocols for all research data. Everything is open access now. And Michael? I couldn't help asking. She smiled slightly. He's running a community health clinic in West Philadelphia. No research, no pharmaceutical ties, just patient care. He's good at it. I nodded, strangely pleased by this news. Why are you here, Elaine? We're establishing an ethics review board at Meridian, she explained, pulling out a folder. Independent physicians and patient advocates with authority to investigate any concerns about research or patient care. We'd like you to chair it. I stared at her in disbelief. You want me, the whistleblower who brought down your hospital's most lucrative research program, to oversee your ethics? That's exactly why we want you, she replied simply. You were right when everyone else was either wrong or silent. We need that voice institutionalized at Meridian. I took the folder, not committing but not refusing. Who proposed this? The board? Michael, actually, she admitted. He said Meridian needs to rebuild around truth, not legacy. As she left, I opened the folder. Inside was the formal invitation, along with a handwritten note from Michael. Some legacies are worth burning down to rebuild properly. This would be your legacy, not ours. Think about it. I placed the folder on my desk, next to the framed copy of the scientific journal article I'd published detailing the methodological failures of the Vassar trial. The article that was now required reading in medical ethics courses nationwide. The Montgomerys had built their legacy on prestige, wealth, and influence. But perhaps the true measure of medical legacy wasn't found in hospital wings bearing family names or lucrative pharmaceutical partnerships. Perhaps it was found in the simple courage to speak truth, regardless of the cost. To stand alone if necessary, armed with nothing but evidence and the conviction that patients deserve better than noble-sounding justifications for ignoble actions. I picked up my phone and typed a response to my ex-husband. I'll consider it. On one condition. We named the ethics board after the 14 patients who died in the Vassar trial. Their legacy matters most. His reply came moments later. I'd already proposed that. It was unanimously approved. Sometimes healing requires first acknowledging the wound, not just for patients, but for medicine itself. And sometimes the most important treatment is simply the truth, administered without compromise, regardless of how much it hurts. The glass and steel expanse of Quantum Systems headquarters gleamed in the San Francisco sunlight as I was escorted to the exit, security guards flanking me like pallbearers at a funeral. Employees peered over monitors as I passed, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and fear. Being marched out was rare at Quantum. The company preferred quieter departures, carefully managed resignations with generous severance packages and ironclad NDAs. My crime didn't merit such gentle handling. Your personal effects will be shipped to your residence, the head of security informed me, his voice professionally neutral as we reached the lobby. Your company devices have been remotely wiped. Of course they have, I replied, handing over my employee badge. Though you might want to tell Brandon that a remote wipe doesn't overwrite everything. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, just enough to tell me my parting shot had landed. My name is Maya Krishnan, and until 30 minutes ago, I was the lead security architect at Quantum Systems, one of the world's most powerful tech companies. Our consumer products were in billions of homes across the globe. Our business software ran Fortune 500 companies, and our operating systems powered everything from smartphones to smart cities. What most people didn't know, what I hadn't known until 4 months ago. was that Quantum also provided specialized surveillance software to governments with troubling human rights records, helping them monitor their citizens with unprecedented precision. Project Oracle, they called it, a system that could predict dissident behavior by analyzing communication patterns, identifying potential regime critics before they even became active. A digital crystal ball that was currently helping 12 authoritarian regimes silence opposition with terrifying efficiency. The Lyft driver who picked me up outside Quantum's campus kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "Rough day?" he finally asked. I looked out at the passing scenery, the manicured tech campuses of Silicon Valley, monuments to innovation that concealed darker purposes behind gleaming facades. "Just transitioning," I replied, checking my secure phone. Messages were already flooding in from journalists responding to the files I'd sent last night. Thousands of pages of internal documents, code samples, and deployment records showing exactly how Project Oracle worked and where it was being used. Rebecca Winters from the Washington Post, confirming receipt of all files. "This is explosive. Call me ASAP." Carlos Mendez from The Guardian, "Need to verify your identity before we proceed. Can you meet?" 25 other messages just like them. By tomorrow morning, Project Oracle would be front-page news worldwide. As the car pulled up to my apartment building, I noticed the black SUV parked across the street, 2 men inside, not bothering to be civil about their surveillance. Quantum security team, no doubt, monitoring my movements. They wouldn't risk confronting me directly, not when they didn't yet know what evidence I had or who I'd shared it with. Inside my apartment, I methodically checked for signs of entry. A hair placed on the doorframe still there. The almost invisible piece of clear tape on the drawer containing my passport undisturbed. Paranoid, perhaps, but I'd spent my career thinking about digital security. The physical kind wasn't so different. My laptop, my personal one, not the company device, was where I'd left it, secured with encryption that would take even Quantum's best engineers years to crack. I didn't power it on. Instead, I called Rebecca Winters from a secure line. "Maya, are you safe?" she asked immediately. "For now," I confirmed. "They fired me this morning, as expected." "We're planning to publish tomorrow at 6 a.m. Eastern," she explained. "The Guardian, Le Monde, and Der Spiegel will run simultaneously. Are you prepared for what comes next?" What comes next? Such a simple phrase for the complete upheaval of my life. "As much as anyone can be," I replied. "Have you verified the Iranian documents?" "Yes," she said grimly. 3 dissidents mentioned in the files have been arrested in the past month. 2 are still missing. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of those lives. When I first discovered Project Oracle while conducting a routine security audit, I tried to believe it was a misunderstanding. That a company founded on the principle of technology for humanity couldn't possibly be helping governments hunt down citizens whose only crime was criticizing their leaders. I'd followed protocol, reporting my concerns to my direct supervisor, Brandon Chen, Executive VP of Security Solutions. He'd seemed appropriately disturbed, promising to investigate and take my findings to CEO Garrett Wilson. 2 days later, I was removed from the security audit and assigned to an unrelated project. A week after that, I received a performance improvement plan citing communication issues and failure to align with company objectives. That's when I knew this wasn't a rogue operation. This was company policy. "The lawyers want to know if you signed an NDA," Rebecca continued, bringing me back to the present. "Of course I did. Everyone at Quantum does. And you understand that they'll use that against you? That they'll say you're violating confidentiality agreements, maybe even national security protocols." I thought about Amir Javadi, an Iranian student whose name appeared in Oracle's files as a potential disruptive influence based on his text messages criticizing the government. Now missing. I thought about Liu Wei, a Chinese lawyer flagged by Oracle for defending religious minorities, currently serving a 10-year sentence for subversion of state power. "Let them try," I said. After hanging up, I packed efficiently, clothes for a week, passport, extra cash, the burner phones I'd purchased over the past month. My go bag, prepared weeks ago when I first decided to become a whistleblower. As darkness fell, I slipped out through the building service exit, avoiding the watchful SUV. A pre-arranged taxi took me to a nondescript hotel registered under a name that couldn't be traced to me. Tomorrow, when the story broke, I would be unreachable. watching the fallout from a secure location. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Last chance, Maya Gito willing to talk. Generous terms. Garrett Wilson, reaching out directly. The CEO of Quantum Systems, whose net worth exceeded $50 billion, was worried enough to make a personal overture. I didn't respond. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Some compromises leave permanent stains. Instead, I powered down my phone, removed the battery, and settled in to wait for morning. The explosion came precisely at 6:00 a.m. Eastern, 3:00 a.m. Pacific. Exposed, TCE giant QANTUM C steams BUILT CURVILL Hain C204 authoritarian regimes, screamed the Washington Post headline. Similar headlines appeared simultaneously across global news outlets. By 5:00 a.m., #quantum surveillance was trending worldwide. By 7:00 a.m., quantum stock had dropped 17% in pre-market trading. By 9:00 a.m., the company had issued a carefully worded statement. Quantum Systems categorically denies providing specialized surveillance technology to foreign governments. The documents in question have been taken out of context by a disgruntled former employee. I watched it all unfold on the hotel television, feeling strangely detached, as if observing someone else's story. My phone, newly activated with a fresh SIM card, buzzed constantly with messages from journalists seeking additional comments. At 11:42 a.m., my sister Priya called from New York. "Oh my God, Maya," she said when I answered. "It's you, isn't it?" The unnamed senior security architect in the Post article. "How did you know?" "Because you've been weird and evasive for months, and because I know my sister. Are you safe? Do you need help?" I hesitated. Involving family meant putting them at risk too. "I'm okay, but it's better if you don't have details right now. They're saying terrible things about you on the news," she warned. "Quantum's PR team is in full damage control. They're calling you unstable, said you were fired for erratic behavior." "Standard whistleblower playbook," I replied, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "Discredit the source when you can't dispute the facts." "The Quantum app on my phone, should I delete it?" "Yes," I said immediately, "and tell everyone you know to do the same." By evening, the story had evolved. Technical experts had reviewed the code samples I provided, confirming they contained sophisticated surveillance capabilities. Human rights organizations issued statements demanding investigations. Congress announced emergency hearings, and then came the message I'd been dreading. They found Archer. Get to secure location now. Archer, my oldest friend and former colleague at Quantum, who had helped me gather evidence about Project Oracle. I've been careful to keep his name out of my disclosures, but Quantum's internal investigation must have uncovered his involvement. I checked out of the hotel immediately, abandoning my careful plan for a new one. If they'd identified Archer, I was no longer operating in theoretical danger. 3 days later, I sat across from Rebecca Winters in a secure location, watching her review the additional documents I kept in reserve, my insurance policy. "This goes even deeper than what you initially shared," she said, scanning the files. "Project Oracle isn't just passive surveillance. They're actively manipulating online discourse in these countries, amplifying certain voices, suppressing others. Digital social engineering," I nodded. "It's not just about identifying dissidents, it's about creating environments where dissent becomes socially unacceptable. And Quantum built this willingly." "Not initially," I explained. "It evolved. First, they sold basic data analytics to these governments for public safety purposes, then enhanced monitoring capabilities for counterterrorism, each step technically defensible, each expansion more intrusive. By the time Oracle became a full-fledged dissident hunting tool, too many people were complicit to turn back, including Brandon Chen." She referenced my former supervisor, who had publicly denounced me as a security risk with a personal vendetta. "Especially Brandon," I confirmed. He was the primary liaison with the government clients. When I brought my concerns to him, I was essentially telling the architect that his building was designed for torture. Rebecca set down her tablet, studying me with the practiced gaze of a veteran journalist. "Why did you do it, Maya? You had a 7-figure salary, stock options worth millions. You were at the pinnacle of your field." I thought about the question carefully, not because I didn't know the answer, but because the truth was both simple and complicated. My parents came to America from India in the 1980s, fleeing political persecution. I said finally. My father was a journalist who criticized the government during the emergency period. He always told me that technology should liberate people, not imprison them. When I discovered what Oracle was doing, I couldn't reconcile it with anything I believed about my work, my company, or myself. You could have walked away quietly, she pointed out, found another job, left the moral compromise behind, and let them keep hunting people whose only crime was speaking their minds. I shook my head. I've spent my career building digital walls to protect people. I couldn't just watch as those same skills were perverted to cage them instead. 1 week after the initial story broke, Quantum Systems stock had lost over $80 billion in value. The company faced investigations from Congress, the SEC, and the Justice Department. Several major clients had suspended their contracts pending review. The personal cost was equally severe. My bank accounts were frozen on dubious legal grounds. Quantum had filed a civil suit against me for breach of contract, theft of proprietary information, and corporate espionage. My professional reputation, at least within the conventional tech industry, was destroyed. Brandon Chen had given interviews painting me as an unstable, attention-seeking employee who had misunderstood legitimate security products. CEO Garrett Wilson had appeared before Congress, offering careful half-truths that acknowledged some international contracts, while denying direct knowledge of how the technology was being used. Then came the breakthrough. An internal quantum whistleblower, someone still inside the company, leaked emails directly contradicting Wilson's testimony. Emails showing he had personally approved Project Oracle's deployment in 2 countries after being explicitly briefed on its capabilities and purposes. The day after those emails became public, I received an encrypted message from an anonymous source inside Quantum. Chen cleaning out his office. Wilson called emergency board meeting. They're burning everything. Thank you for your courage. 3 days later, Garrett Wilson resigned as CEO of Quantum Systems. Brandon Chen was placed on administrative leave. The company announced it was reviewing all international contracts and recommitting to ethical technology deployment. Too little, too late. 2 months after my firing, I testified before Congress, describing in detail how Project Oracle had evolved from basic analytics into a sophisticated tool for tracking, predicting, and neutralizing political dissent. Ms. Krishnan, one representative asked, do you believe Quantum Systems leadership fully understood how their technology was being used? Not only did they understand, I replied, they specifically designed it for those purposes. Project Oracle wasn't a legitimate security tool that was misused. It was created to do exactly what it did: help repressive governments identify and neutralize opposition before it could organize. And when you brought these concerns forward internally, I was silenced, sidelined, and ultimately terminated. The legal battles continue for years. Quantum Systems spent millions trying to discredit me, frame me as a thief and a liar, bury me in litigation. I countered with the support of digital rights organizations, pro bono attorneys, and a court of public opinion. 3 years after becoming a whistleblower, I stood outside the federal courthouse following the settlement announcement. Quantum had agreed to pay $1.2 billion in fines, establish an independent ethics oversight board, and terminate all contracts related to Project Oracle. They had also finally dropped their lawsuits against me. A junior reporter approached cautiously. Ms. Krishnan, do you feel vindicated? I considered the question. Vindication implied a personal victory. This wasn't about me. I feel hopeful, I replied instead. Hopeful that technology companies will recognize that building tools of oppression, no matter how profitable, has consequences. Hopeful that more insiders will speak up when they see ethical lines being crossed. What about your career? Your former colleagues say you'll never work in tech again. I smiled slightly. I'm currently consulting with privacy advocacy groups and teaching digital ethics at Berkeley. It turns out there's plenty of work for someone who understands exactly how technology can be weaponized against the vulnerable. Later that evening, I received an email from a name I didn't recognize, but an email server I did. Quantum Systems. I was hired to replace you as security architect. Today they asked me to review a new analytics package for election security in a Southeast Asian country. I remembered your congressional testimony. What should I do? I thought carefully before responding, remembering my own journey from loyal employee to whistleblower, the personal cost balance against the moral imperative. Document everything. Trust no one inside the company. Contact me through secure channels. Then I added, the source code of our lives isn't written in programming languages. It's written in the choices we make when no one is watching and the stands we take when everyone is. Sometimes the most important firewall isn't digital at all. It's the ethical boundary between what we can build and what we should build. In crossing that line, Quantum had corrupted its own source code. In exposing that corruption, I'd finally fulfilled my true role as a security architect, protecting people, not systems. 5 years after the quantum revelations, I published a book titled The Source Code: Ethics and Accountability in the Digital Age. In the acknowledgments, I thanked the unnamed whistleblowers who had followed in my footsteps, exposing similar programs at other technology companies. We have formed an invisible network of conscience within the tech industry. Engineers, designers, and executives united by the belief that technology should liberate rather than control, connect rather than divide, empower rather than oppress. The black SUVs had long stopped following me. The threats had dwindled to occasional online harassment. The legal battles had settled into an uneasy peace. But the work continued, because the source code of technology is constantly being rewritten, and with it the rules of power in our digital society. The question isn't whether technology will change the world, it's whether those changes will bend toward justice or control. And that isn't decided by algorithms or artificial intelligence. It's decided by the human beings who write the code, build the systems, and most importantly, those who are willing to speak when those systems are abused. In the end, the most important code I ever wrote wasn't in Python or C++ or any programming language at all. It was the moral code that finally compelled me to stand up and say, not with my work, not in my name, not while I can still speak truth to power.